Hello and welcome to episode 5 of my Mass Transit Kerbal Space Program Let's Play series. As you notice, we have the same vessel we just had flying toward the planet. I did a quick loop around Kerbin to slow down a bit and land on the day side. Even though I did get the ambient light adjustment mod, for some reason I still like landing in the day. Just saves me from having to use it. Another thing you'll notice is I sound a little bit different. I'm using a different mic. Let me know what you think. If you like it better, say so, and I'll keep using it. If it's worse, then I can easily switch back to the other one. I have no real preference, but I believe this one is supposed to be a bit higher quality, though I am unsure exactly. Anyhow, we are coming in for our landing, have our parachutes deployed from the Realistic Parachutes mod, which makes it's really nice because it gives it a more gradual slowdown that you can set, I believe, to about 6 seconds, 4 or 6 seconds when they deploy, which is a lot better than having all the force be applied instantly, slowing down your vessel, because that usually causes things to break very violently. But this parachute mod gradually slows you down, which is much nicer, I do have to say. But we splash down in the water, and Jebediah gets to go home for a little while. He won't be staying there too long. And we get almost 500, 600 science. Quite a bit. Now, I'm going to go and check on my lander I previously sent to the moon, the one that was collecting some lunar liquid for us, because we're curious as to what we can use it for, and we need to bring some back to the Kerbal Space Center. Now, if you remember previously, the issue with it was I did not have enough power generation, because that drill is constantly sapping power, whereas it's also constantly trying to drink up lunar liquid. However, since our canister is full, we cannot take in any more on the ship, and we're still using power. Since it is a probe and we don't have a Kerbal inside, well, we can't, since we're out of power, we can't control the probe, which means we can't reel up the drill to stop us from using power. We'll have to plan a rescue mission later to actually fix that issue. Now, what we have here is my Minmus probe that I sent a little while ago, and it is now arriving at Minmus. The plan is to put this one in a polar orbit so that we can start scanning Minmus for Kethane and try to find some nice Kethane landing spots. What I hope to see, what I hope to see is that we will be able to get some landing spots on the ocean beds or seabeds of Minmus, because they're nice large flat areas that are incredibly easy to land on, which is very nice for bases and mining operations. As you can see, we're just planning our maneuver node, which they're much nicer in Kerbal Space Program 23.5, simply because they don't delete when you left click on them to try to open them, whereas sometimes they would just randomly delete. Now, I still do have that big travel stage attached where we've got one of the big engines from KW Rocketry. I believe it's something like 1400 thrust, kilonewtons of thrust, and a decent sized tank on it. But I'm going to try to get my periapsis below 50,000. That way we go about 50 times time acceleration and can scan the planet for whatever we need to scan it for.
Now, while I finish up clearing out this maneuver node and circularizing my orbit as best I can, I'm going to impose kind of a new rule for this series, and that is build times. I know I've been launching a lot of spacecraft, and in all honesty, I have 2 more to launch this episode alone, which you'll be seeing shortly, but the new rule that I'm going to impose is 12 for launch times. Any vessel takes 12 hours plus 1/2 the part count in hours. So if it was a 100-part vessel, it would take 12 hours plus 50 hours to get it assembled and built. That way I try to, the reason I'm going to impose this mostly is because I want to try to force myself to create reusable systems, because if I use a reusable system, I do not have to wait the hour to already build it. I can just refuel it. So, for example, if I created a launch stage that got things into almost completely into orbit and then fell back down, and I recover it, I can use that launch stage without having to worry about anything else. Meaning I could create it as a subassembly, say that subassembly had 79 parts. If I recover that subassembly then with the 79 parts, then I can reuse it in anything without having to actually count those in the total vessel for launch time. Because the idea would be I refuel it and don't have to worry about it. So we have our Minmus orbit circularized for that probe, and that's going to start scanning for Kethane. Now you see me going quickly through the rest of my science. Previously, I believe I was just checking it out, but now I'm actually purchasing the science, and what I'm doing here is actually getting some better engines, getting a better power supply, because I really do need better solar panels, especially if I'm going to be doing mining operations. You see that purchase there. I don't know if I grab these little parts yet, but I do end up grabbing the grappling hooks, or the extended arms. I'm not sure what they're called. Yeah, advanced grabbing unit for asteroids, because I do want to get into asteroids in a little bit. Now, this is one of the launches I was talking about. If you remember this vessel, I believe this was in episode 1 or 2. It's a tri-probe launcher. Anyway, it has 3 small probes that we're sending up to Minmus, so that we can start crashing them into the surface once we get a lander down to get the seismometer to give us lots of scientific data. Since interstellar mod changes how the seismic science utility item works, I guess. Basically, it changes it so that you need to crash something into the surface of a planet while it's scanning the planet for data, and you get some science. I don't know if velocity or where you impact really matters, but I do know you just have to basically deorbit something onto the surface. And of course, we can get tons of science from that. I believe on the moon you get something like 250, and Minmus is likely more. So it's quite a bit of science, especially earlier on. Now, I didn't quite finish talking about what I meant by build times exactly. The reason I'm implementing the build times is while I do this maneuver is because, like I said, it focuses on me forcing me to use reusable parts. And it's also going to start driving me to need a space station, because around this point I've realized I don't have a space station yet, for either refueling or just general purposes. But I have the extraplanetary launch pads mod enabled, and I'm going to see if I can start doing the progressive builds with it to try to get me more launch pads, in which case I can launch more vessels, because I have been launching a lot. It's been driving the science team very quickly, and I just feel as though it will create some interesting challenge for me to try to face. For example, if I have let's say a transfer window in something like 30 days, then I only have so many parts I can get into space in that 30 days. Now, what we have here is another vessel you've seen before, this time with Jebediah and Bill riding it into space. This is the dual lander. I've edited a little bit from the previous one that went to the moon. This one does not have the 2 small probes on the front, and it's got a couple other changes, but none of them are really all that important, I guess. Anyway, I'm taking this one to the moon because we've only explored a few of the biomes, and I want to try and explore a few more. That way we can get all the science possible. Now, of course, I could still send another 6 to 12 landers on all different biomes and get science from the moon, but we're just going to send 2 for now, because we do need to start working on our resource collection, which was kind of the purpose of this series. It's just been taking me a little bit to get enough science to really start out, and of course find the liquids. Now, this is just these standard solid rocket boosters, which are really high in the atmosphere, and they're not necessarily very effective really high up, Well, I mean, they're equally effective, but they're just not as good because you can't control them. But we've dropped out all those stages, and we're just waiting for a transfer. Some things that I do hope to do implementing this new rule is I have a couple ideas for later. For example, with the, as I mentioned before, extraplanetary launch pads. There are a few things you can do with them, and also with the implementation of resources, I can create certain vessels, I believe, in the editing. I haven't tried it, so don't take my word on it. But you can, in a way, I could make it so certain vessels require different resources that are custom resources. Just like with science experiments. You can create a science experiment that requires a specific resource. For example, what I mean by this is, let's say I gathered 5,000 lunar liquid, and let's say I created a science experiment that was based on any part, could be stuck on any part, but it was test lunar liquid, consumes 5,000 lunar liquid, and gives me so much science out of it. Now, most of the sciences actually do this. They require a little bit of power to actually run, and that's typically how it works. There's also another way of doing it with the science lab, because if you explore the science lab config a little bit, and I did try this one, you can make the science, since the science lab naturally consumes, I think, 6 electric charge to get it 15% more transmit bonus. You can use the science experiment to consume, let's say, our 5,000 lunar liquid to give it a 120% transmit boost, in which case it would be actually better to transmit the data. However, you can also store the data instead of just transmitting it, so you can give yourself a 120% science boost to a bland experiment for the resource. Like the mystery goo, maybe we want to stick that through a custom lunar liquid container and just say test with lunar liquid, and then we consume 1,000, 5,000 lunar liquid, and what happens is the experiment then gets 500% scientific value because we spent a resource on it. I might do a video showing that. I'm not sure yet because I'm not sure on the exact details. I did try it and it did work. However, I've been having some strange encounter. I had a strange encounter with it when I tried it before. Whereas the part that was the scientific lab didn't understand it was a scientific lab, I guess. If I can sort that out, then I'll definitely do a video on it, though. So, as you remember, I mentioned earlier about the seismic scanners. And what I have here is just a little tiny probe with one of these seismic scanners on it. And that's because in previous video we put up 3 small probes. Now one of them ran completely out of fuel, but 2 of them were still valid. And I'm just going to send this away from the launch pad a little bit. Pop the parachute as to land it nice and safely. The engine will easily be able to take the impact, seeing as how this is not a very heavy probe. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to land this here, and we're going to be able to crash I'm going to show one of the probes crashing. You don't need to see both. It's the exact same process. But I'll show one of the probes crashing in a little bit, and we're going to get science for this, because this is how the Interstellar mod edits the seismic scanner. Instead of just landing and then right-clicking and saying do science, it works a little bit differently. This part, you have to record seismic data, in which case it will start monitoring for impact events. And as you can see, we're going to the map view so we can grab our probe that we want to slam violently into the planet. And it doesn't actually have to be a probe. You can slam manned vessels into the planet for the same data. However, killing Kerbals seems a little unethical. Point retrograde as to slow down. And I still need to figure out that the engine isn't activated. If you notice there is cathane in the vessel, that's because when I edited the engines, they weren't working initially. from the previous video where I changed up these small engines to run on Kethane. That way I could get that other vessel out from being stuck where it was, in orbit around the moon, I believe. And I didn't notice it until actually later, because I figured I'd run out of fuel when this was just barely touching down. But I had a lot more fuel than I realized. That's because the engine mode automatically switched. Now, I'm not going to say this is cheating because the vessel would have already slammed into the planet, regardless if the Kethane was used or not. But I do end up consuming that 100 units of Kethane. And what's actually really oddly convenient about this vessel is I don't think hitting the planet in the ocean versus land really matters for the seismic scanner. However, I do manage to hit an island just perfectly. As you can see, air resistance slows us down quite a bit to less than 200 meters per second before we hit the ground, but ultimately the craft is entirely obliterated with our lucky shot of hitting an island. And there it goes. As you can see, impact recorded. Science report can now be seen from something. But let's take a look back at this launcher, the dual probe launcher to be exact. It has made its SOI change to the moon, and we're going to start detaching it. Well, once we get into orbit, we're going to start separating Jebediah and Bill from the main launcher, so they can begin landing on the moon to collect us science. Now, I need all this science because I am looking to get some better engines, so that I can indeed start with interplanetary travel. Because I want to go to Duna and start mining some iron, as well as other planets to see what interesting resources they may or may not have. So, pretty standard capture. Go to the periapsis and burn retrograde so that we can slow down and let the moon's lesser gravity condemn us to an orbit. I dropped that stage because the fuel ran out. And we just continue with this much smaller, more fuel efficient engine. However, it is still way more than enough delta V to get us captured. Now, I do actually like the alternative resource panel because it shows you how much of the resource you have in a stage. For example, the blue bars. And I enjoy being able to see those because they show you how much you have outside the stage you're currently using, the blue ones anyway. And that's really helpful for figuring out how much delta, because what am I trying to say here? The normal resource panel tells you how much fuel is on the vessel in total. It doesn't tell you how much fuel is left in the stage. So you kind of have to either assume how much is left in the stage, or look at the fuel tank. Whereas the alternative resource panel tells you how much is in that stage before, of course, you run out and all the fuel's used. Now I'm going to activate all three of these engines manually because I don't want to try staging them. Just because if I decouple this, then the probe is useless. However, I am going to move them into their own stage once they're active so that it's a little more organized. And Jebediah, as always, is going to take the lead over Bill. And we're really going to be able to see the differences in their piloting when it comes to landing. So, Jebediah is going to land for us right off the bat. I don't want to decouple both of them just yet, because landing them one at a time is ideal. I'm not very good at landing two vessels at the same time, until at least I get into KOS scriptable autopilot system, which is a very fun mod, seeing as how you can make it basically land two vessels for you. You can just get them going the same speeds, give them the same script, and you can watch both of them land, ideally. That mod can also get you a lot of information. It's quite a bit of fun. I'll definitely be getting into it later. However, maybe not anytime soon. But I have my periapsis extremely low, and we're going to go for a rather efficient landing. where we come within about 10,000 meters of the surface, and we just start killing our horizontal velocity. This is much more efficient than slamming into the planet head first because of how gravity works. Whereas gravity is indeed affecting us currently, but we don't have to fight it to slow down. And until all of our horizontal speed is killed, then that is when we will have to fight gravity. Since gravity is very helpful and very much a nuisance. But I believe in Jebediah as a trained Kerbal that he is. And of course, these engines don't have any sound or particle effects because of the way I edited them for whatever reason. Turning them basically into a rapier engine made them a little bit different. However, they still provide thrust, and I believe that's all we need. This vessel, because of that 100 kethane that's stored in the engines, this vessel actually is heavier than it needs to be, seeing as how it's got 300 kethane sitting useless. And of course I do the magnetometer data just before landing, seeing as how I cannot do it on the surface. And of course just reading off my information like impact time from the flight engineer. And Jebediah has a very easy landing, whereas we literally just go straight down, make sure we don't go too fast, and it works out. Bill's landing, however, is more interesting. So I'm just seeing what science I can collect from before we actually touch down. Only a couple 100 meters now. And Jebediah will be on the surface, where we get to start crashing things, because that's what we do here in Kerbal Space Program. We slam things against each other and watch explosions happen. So, nice easy landing, plenty of fuel to go, and touchdown. We almost flip over, but do not have that problem. The overpowered torque from our capsule allows us to easily rotate back. And it's science time. So we do our mystery goo, our science junior lab, where we get 100 science from it, which will be very nice once we bring it back. We also have a second mystery goo. I just put both of them there for balance, even though repeated science does have diminishing returns, whereas the second iteration we will not get nearly as much. Can't forget about the crew report, as well as the EVA report, which we'll be doing soon. Still have thermometers and such. The boring logging of all different sciences. Now I turn the seismic scanner on because I'm going to be slamming that transfer stage into the lunar surface pretty soon. Before the end of this episode, even though we are coming pretty close to the end actually. However, Jebediah needs to finish his science gathering, and we need to watch something explode, I believe, before we end this. I do want to make another comment. The microphone that I'm using, please do if you want to anyway. Let me know if it's better or worse, because I'm fine with switching to either one. This one just, to me, sounds a little less like it's echoing, I should say. So I guess I do like it better in that sense. However, back into the game, the dual lander with launcher. We're going to be putting that transfer stage out of its orbit as to collect a bunch of science. But first, we don't want Bill to be harmed, so we're going to detach his vessel using the decoupler, and we are going to just burn away from that vessel. Bill will be landing next time in a much more interesting landing than Jebediah's, because things go horribly wrong. But Bill, being one of the veteran Kerbals, is able to solve our problems. Now I don't need the ambient light, so I just shut that down by right-clicking on it, and it's time to deorbit. So this stage has way more than enough fuel, so I actually cancel out all of my horizontal speed, which was only about 600 meters per second in total, and then I use the extra fuel to actually throw myself faster into the moon to try and make the moon quake as much as possible so the seismic scanner can get more than enough science for us. Even though, as I stated before, I have no idea if speed or where you hit the planet actually matters. In the event that it does, we will be going plenty fast enough to get all the science we could possibly wish for. And as you can see, we're firing straight towards the planet, gaining velocity quite quickly. However, with this crashing of a probe, it does bring us to the end of episode 5. So, I thank you all for watching. I am PTTGRW, signing out.